Hello, welcome to Pitching 101. Tonight I'm going to keep it short. Just want to discuss a little something quick tonight for all you parents out there that have kids in select baseball or even at Little League. I want to discuss what's going on as far as coaches that are out there second guessing or talking bad about other coaches about what they do. Um, the first thing you want to do is you want to look at effectiveness. In other words, if your kid's effective, he's doing well, he's not getting hurt, he's not sore, he's pitching well, or maybe hitting the ball well, and he's effective in the field, doing well, not getting hurt, things of that nature. Um, it's hard to dispute that they're doing something right or wrong. Sometimes what you run into is you run into two different coaches in pitching that say, well, if you do this, you're going to get hurt, or do you do this, you're going to get hurt. And they go back and forth amongst each other. And it don't take long. What it does is it puts doubt in a parent's mind, and they're not real sure what's right or wrong. Truth of the matter is that there's a lot of professional teams, a lot of professional guys out there right now that are doing study after study trying to find out what's right and what's wrong. I'm not talking about when I say professional guys like me that do this for livings and they take checks or take a payment for a living, and then it's called a profession. What I'm talking about is actually at the Major League Baseball level, or some of these high-end doctors that they're working with, like Dr. Andrews or Dr. Meister or those type of guys. What they do is they do a lot of studies. They're doing a lot of studies all the time about what's actually causing injuries. At this point right now, there's a lot of discussion about mechanics. There's a lot of discussion about pitch counts, things of that nature. Truth is, they don't really 100% know. But what I can tell you is this: back 20, 30 years ago, there weren't as many guys getting hurt. And that's where they're trying to look at is what was going on back then. A lot of guys were raw back then. We didn't have 4,000 pitching coaches or hitting coaches right up the road that were waiting to take a check from you to teach your son how to hit a baseball or throw a baseball. Now there's coaches on every corner, just waiting, saying that they know exactly what they're talking about. If we can get back to being a little bit more raw and not have so many guys training you or training your kids, we can probably start getting rid of some of the injuries that are happening. Um, but the fact is everybody wants their kid to be the next Nolan Ryan, and so they're buying into all these different pitching coaches and things like that. So now what happens is now we got to walk into a room with a coach that claims that he's the best that there is out there, and that is telling the parents that the other coach that they're working with or up the road is going to hurt them. To settle that, this is what you have to do. Period. This is the easiest way to do it. You need to walk in and you need to ask, show me what you've done with other players. Show me guys that have pitched in college without injury. Show me guys that are have not had Tommy John surgery that played under you. Do you have anybody that's ever had injury? Do you have guys that are successful playing right now? How many guys do you have at the higher levels that are playing right now in college and in the pros? Do you work with any of them direct, and do they have any injuries on and off that they're working with or having a rehab? All those different things basically shows what their guys at the higher levels are doing. And what's important about that is they're bigger, they're stronger, and they throw harder. And that's where most kids or most guys start getting hurt, is when they start getting bigger and they throw harder. They're taking a small object and they're trying to throw it as hard as they can over and over and over. And when they're that big and they throw that hard, there's a lot of torque, or there's a lot of stress that's put in their joints, in their elbow and their shoulder and their backs, a lot of things like that. So what you want to do is you want to look and say, okay, what's those higher guys doing? What's your top end guys doing? If you can show me what your top end guys are doing, and those guys aren't getting hurt, then I'm interested more in what you're teaching. To hear someone just say, well, I know what I'm talking about because my kids at 12U are dominating, that makes no sense whatsoever. You can't base everything off of a 12-year-old team that's just raw and out there playing or putting the ball in play, and they're running base to base. And I mean base to base because the catchers aren't throwing those guys out left and right at that age. You can't base it on that. You have to base it on at the higher end. And if they tell you at 14 years old, we don't carry teams anymore, that's the first thing you got to look at. Because what that means is that they're not confident enough to continue training and teaching kids at a higher level than that. Okay? So that's number one. The second thing is you say, okay, how many varsity pitchers do you have out there that you train specifically that are your number one or number two guys in the district or in the area? If they can't tell you but one or two guys, and those are one or two guys that have been with them for a short amount of time, they haven't been there very long, or maybe they just recruited them for that break, but they don't actually train those guys, you can't go off of that either. But if they don't have a bunch of those guys, then that tells you they are not training too many guys at the higher end. If they tell you they have 2 or 3 or 4 college guys that they train, or maybe over the last 5 years they got 7 or 8 guys that they train, that's a little better numbers. But now let's talk about how successful are those guys? How successful have they been? Are they getting injured? Are they hurt? What kind of, are they still playing? Did they move on beyond that? Are they coaching now? Things of that nature. And if they can tell you they got some pro guys that they've trained or worked with and they're not injured and they're making their way through, then those are guys too that they're throwing at the highest level possible and they're not getting injured. Then that's a start. I can only tell you a handful of guys in Central Texas like that. I can only tell you a handful of guys in Texas that are successful like that. So that being said, now what you got to do is you got to step out and say, okay, do I want my son learning how to pitch from somebody that doesn't have those levels under their hat? Now, I'm not saying don't play for them, not at all. But what I am saying is that you have to go in and you have to say, I got to take care of my son. I cannot just trust that this guy knows how to teach a kid how to throw a baseball. I got to trust him in a coaching. He can tell my kid when to bunt, when to throw a certain pitch, how to run. He can call signs on if we're swinging, we're hit and run, things like that. He might be a great coach and teach the field right. He might be a good fielding coach. He might teach how to throw right in the field. He might be a great hitting coach, okay? Which you could still do that too with hitting. You can go and check the higher levels and see how successful their guys are. Because just because they're winning every weekend with a small 12, 13, 14-year-old team does not mean that at 17, 18 years old that their kids are going to be successful. Okay? It's a whole different world at that level. Now we talk about college, it's going to be a way different world, and then we talk about the pros. It's on another planet. I mean, it's another universe. So that being said, we want to take it back a notch, and we want to start talking about, as parents that are looking for select programs, you have to go out and you have to vet, not the coach. Who cares if the coach played pro baseball? It helps. Don't get me wrong. There are a lot of guys out there that it helps, but that's not what we're looking for. What we're looking for is we're looking for success in our players. I don't care about somebody walking in with a resume 10, 12, 14 years long. I don't care about that. It doesn't mean that they can teach the game. There are some that have a better idea of the game, and the experiences are great that you learn. But that being said, what you have to do is you've got to make sure that these guys are being successful beyond what they're teaching at that level with their players. And if they're not, you probably shouldn't be listening to them when it comes to pitching. And if the first thing they want to do is turn around and throw somebody under the bus that's been doing this for a long time and start calling people in that area irrelevant, and that these guys don't have anything that they're hanging their hat on and don't know what they're doing, that's a pure sign of they are trying to push you away from other people and pull them into you. And that's not how this works. There's a lot of us that work together. We'll force each other to other kids left and right. We'll work with kids, train kids, and tell them to go to these other people to play for them and things like that, because we all have great connections to help continue moving these kids on to college. Nothing to bother with that. Nothing to worry about with that. We do that. So you don't want guys that are out there that are trying to knock other programs to begin with. I'm not knocking programs here. I'm not saying don't go to other programs. I'm not saying don't play in a program like that. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying in a pitching situation, that's a situation where a kid more than likely can get injured. Compared to everything else, that's one of the situations where a kid can get injured the fastest, and you've got to make sure that you're making great decisions, keeping up with pitch counts, not letting the kids overthrow, making sure their mechanics are staying consistent. You don't see them dragging through the game. They're still throwing strikes, and later in the game, you got to make sure that the pitch counts are right. You got to make sure they recover right. You got to make sure that they're running afterwards. You got to make sure they're banding afterwards. You got to make sure ice if they're sore or hurting. You got to make sure they stretch properly before the game. You got to make sure all that stuff's in place, and during the week they're staying on top of what they're supposed to do, throwing, long toss, any kind of working out, bullpens, and all that kind of stuff. Because ultimately, you'll always be there as a parent with them to make sure you're advocating for them to be safe. And that's what matters the most. All right, done. 11 minutes. I said short. That's probably short for me. I just want everybody to understand. I just want your kids to be successful and not get hurt. And it's an epidemic right now. And every week there's a new guy in the pros getting hurt. And it's just a blend of people that are just coming up from all these pitching coaches nowadays. And anything that we can do as coaches to stick together and make sure that we're not hurting kids is what we're supposed to be doing. And I'm the first to say, if I didn't know pitching, I wouldn't do this. 22 years as a pitching coach, 9 years right now as a program director, 2 years as an assistant coach or associate head coach in college. Now almost 5 years working with the Mets. Just all across the board as far as training. I have, and with hundreds of kids that I've placed in college, guys in the pros, lots of varsity top end players. We do not have Tommy John surgery around here. We haven't had one. We're not going to have one because we make sure our mechanics are right. And I can have list of players to show you that are playing right now, currently at high-end colleges and in the pros. So I'm not saying just bring your kids to me directly. I'm saying vet the people that way. That's the way it's supposed to be. Thank you for tuning in tonight.